The scorching sun hung like a judgmental eye over the vast expanse of the frontier. Dust swirled along the dry plains, and the wind carried the faint clatter of hooves in the distance. The town of Red Hollow, usually alive with chatter and the creak of wagon wheels, now lay in an uneasy silence. It was as though the West itself was holding its breath, waiting for something no one could yet name. At the heart of town, the auction block stood, a grim stage where men and women had been sold before. But today, the air carried a different kind of tension. Today, it wasn't just goods or livestock being traded. Today, human lives were on the line, their freedom held hostage by greed and power. The townsfolk, curious and fearful, lined the streets. The murmurs carried tales of desperation, whispered warnings, and the kind of suspense that made your throat dry even under the hot sun. On that block stood a group of men and women, eyes wide, hearts hammering like the hooves of a runaway horse. They were not criminals, not lawbreakers. They were farmers, blacksmiths, simple folk who had been captured in a wave of deceit and sold like nothing more than cattle. And above them, with a smile as sharp as a knife, was Silas Granger, the auctioneer. His voice, smooth and cruel, rang out over the dry square. "Step right up! Finest people in the West, for the right price you can claim them as your own. Who'll bid first?" The crowd shuffled, coins jingling and hands twitching. But none dared to speak, not until the dust cleared, and the one man who could change everything appeared. He was called Jackson Cain, a lone cowboy whose reputation stretched across the frontier like wildfire. Known for his unyielding sense of justice and his uncanny ability to read a man's soul, Jackson's presence always demanded attention. His boots kicked up dust as he approached, hat tilted low, eyes hidden but unmistakably burning with a silent fury. The chatter of the townsfolk faltered, then died. Even the wind seemed to pause. Jackson stopped at the edge of the auction block. He surveyed the scene, noting the fear in the eyes of those bound, the cruel grin on Granger's face, the calculating stares of potential buyers. A single deliberate word escaped his lips, heavy with warning. "Enough!" Granger laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the wooden storefronts. "And who might you be, stranger, to tell me my business?" Jackson didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lifted his chin, letting his gaze sweep the crowd. "I'm the one who won't let you profit off fear and suffering." A murmur ran through the town. People leaned in, some in hope, some in disbelief. Granger's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. He wasn't used to being challenged. Not like this. The auction continued, but every word now seemed hollow. Jackson's presence was a stone, thrown into still waters, the ripples, spreading faster than anyone could stop them. The first bidder, a heavy-set rancher, with greed in his eyes, raised his hand. But before the hammer could strike, Jackson's voice cut across the square, sharp as a gunshot. "Think carefully. This isn't property you're buying. These are lives. Lives that deserve a chance at freedom." The crowd went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, carrying only the heavy weight of anticipation. The rancher hesitated, sweat beading on his brow. Jackson's words were a spark-lighting tinder, igniting something dormant in the hearts of those who had watched injustice for too long. Then, as if on cue, the sound of hooves thundered from the outskirts of town. Riders appeared, dust trailing behind them like the ghosts of the past. They were outlaws, bandits, mercenaries, men whose allegiances were uncertain, whose loyalty was as shifting as the desert sands. But they stopped short, recognizing Jackson. A tense silence hung heavy. The town had never seen anything like it. Jackson's eyes scanned the crowd again, landing on the faces of the captives. They were trembling, yet hope sparked in their eyes, fragile but real. This was the moment, the pivot on which fate would balance. "Today," Jackson said, voice low but carrying like thunder, "the West stands still. Not for gold, not for glory, but for what is right." Granger sneered, stepping forward. "And what, pray tell, is right to a lone cowboy? You think you can change the rules of this land?" Jackson didn't flinch. He drew his revolver, spinning it in a practiced motion that spoke of countless days surviving the wilderness, of nights spent staring into the darkness where law and chaos blurred. But he didn't fire, not yet. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not changing the rules. I'm reminding you of them. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of gunpowder and dust. The townsfolk, once mere spectators, now edged closer, emboldened by Jackson's defiance. The first buyer lowered his hand. Then another. The tide was turning slowly, irresistibly. Granger's face hardened. "You'll pay for this," he spat. "No one defies me and lives to tell the tale." Jackson's lips curved into a faint, calm smile. "I've lived on this frontier long enough to know one truth. Fear is powerful, but courage can move mountains." Suddenly a shot rang out, not from Jackson, but from the edge of the crowd. A stray bullet whizzed past, striking the wooden post near the auction block. Gasps filled the square. Chaos threatened to erupt. But Jackson remained calm, eyes narrowing, fingers steady on his revolver. "Enough," he said again, louder this time. "Leave now, or I will make sure every man here regrets stepping out of line." The bandits, the buyers, Granger's cronies, they hesitated. Fear mingled with respect in their eyes. Jackson's reputation was not born from myth. It was forged in the fires of countless confrontations, battles fought and won in the lawless expanse of the West. Then a voice from the crowd, a young man barely more than a boy, spoke up. "He's right. We've been silent too long. We've let men like him dictate our lives." Murmurs grew into shouts. The townsfolk, once paralyzed by fear, found their voice, and with that voice they found power. One by one they stepped forward, forming a barrier between the captives and Granger's men. The balance of the town shifted in a heartbeat. Granger's fury was a storm ready to break. He drew his own gun, but Jackson's hand was faster. The revolver sang twice in the searing air, bullets finding their marks, not to kill, but to disarm, to remind, to warn. The sound echoed across the town, reverberating in every heart present. The moment stretched, tense and unbroken. Then Granger dropped his weapon, realizing the futility of defiance against both one man's resolve and the awakening of a town. Jackson lowered his gun. "The West stands still," he said again. "Not because it fears, but because it remembers. Today we choose what kind of West we want to live in." The captives were freed. Tears mingled with dust on their faces, but their smiles were brighter than any sunrise over the plains. Jackson turned to leave, hat low, silhouette framed against the glaring sun. And the West truly did stand still. Not in fear, not in silence, but in awe. The story of that day spread across the frontier. Every town, every settlement, spoke of Jackson Cain, the lone cowboy, whose choice shook the very foundation of the West. He became a legend, not for the battles he fought, but for the courage he inspired. Long after he rode into the horizon, the people of Red Hollow remembered. They remembered that a single man's choice, grounded in justice and honor, could stop the world in its tracks. That sometimes the West did not move forward with guns blazing or cattle driving. It paused, listened and learned what true courage looked like. And so the frontier endured, scarred but wiser, haunted but hopeful, because of one cowboy. One choice, one moment when the West stood still.